Let's talk about 3 reasons to avoid passive aggression in your marriage. Now, as usual, my wife and I will cover these talking points. So with your small group or with your mentoring, a marriage mentoring couple, make sure that you download that workbook, follow along as we go through the steps here and talk through this really important topic of passive aggressive communication. Now, this exists in everyone's marriage. Maybe you don't know what it is, so why don't we start by defining it?
Passive-aggressive communication is saying hurtful things in an indirect way. So the aggressive part is that you're doing hurtful things toward your spouse. The passive part is that you package it in a less obvious way, maybe in a joke or an offhand comment. So here's an example. Let's say you're in a conversation with your husband. Well, let me say it this way. I'm in a conversation with my husband. He's kind of lecturing me about something I had done wrong. A passive-aggressive response from me might be rolling my eyes and saying something like, "Yep, you're always right." You see, I'm passive enough that I'm not coming out and saying you're a big jerk and you're a know-it-all, but the intention behind my words is actually to say that. I'm actually annoyed and frustrated by him, but I said it in a way that's less obvious.
Okay, so let's get to the reasons that you should avoid being passive aggressive in your marriage. Here's the first most obvious reason. It's hurtful. Now, I hate to disappoint. That's a super obvious reason not to be passive aggressive, but let's make sure to cover that. Like, being passive aggressive in your marriage is hurtful. It's hurtful to your spouse. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. It's hurtful to your spouse. It's just as bad as being aggressive. It might even be worse than being aggressive, because at least if you're being aggressive, you're being somewhat truthful about it. But when you're passive aggressive, you're just being hurtful. You know, it's kind of that almost invalidating sometimes. And so it's just not helpful in your marriage. It doesn't build up your marriage. It doesn't build up your relationship. It's a terrible way to communicate. So that's the first thing. It's hurtful.
The second reason to avoid it, it creates confusion in your marriage. There's nothing good or productive in communication if you're being passive-aggressive and indirect in what you're trying to say, but your spouse isn't getting it, right? It just creates chaos, unnecessary confusion. Your spouse is no more clear on what's bothering you when you choose those tactics. Let's go back to my example. My husband's kind of lecturing me. I roll my eyes. My passive-aggressive response was, "Okay, honey, you know everything." Okay, now my spouse, my husband, is left to be thinking, "Well, that sounded kind of weird. Is she mad at me? What did I do? What's the problem?" Because I wasn't being clear and I wasn't just being direct with my communication, my husband's kind of confused. It creates unnecessary chaos. It's kind of like I'm creating a different conversation than the one we were currently having. It creates confusion. It's not helpful. And here's a third reason to avoid being passive-aggressive in your communication. It's a form of deception. Now, that might sound pretty strong, but it's the truth. We're kind of lying to our spouse when we know in our heart of hearts that my intention in making that comment of, "Okay, honey, you know everything," I'm slipping in a jab there. That's the truth. I'm mad and I wanted to say something, but I wanted to be passive enough about it that he didn't quite maybe pick up on it. So that's really a form of deception. It's like a lie. Because I'm not being totally truthful. I'm not being honest about what my true intentions were in saying the comment that I said. So we have to realize passive-aggressive communication is a form of deception.
So here's the bottom line. In the end, no one benefits from passive-aggressive communication. You know, for these 3 reasons and probably many more that you can come up with on your own, but nobody benefits from it. I mean, remember the point to communication in marriage, really in any relationship, but especially in a marriage, the point to communication is that people benefit from it. Look at what it says in Ephesians chapter 4. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be a benefit to those who hear them. Make sure that how you communicate in marriage, learn the habits, the practical, good communication, healthy communication habits, so that you can benefit your marriage, so you can have a better marriage. That's the whole point. And that's why you should do everything you can to avoid being passive-aggressive in your communication in your marriage. Now go ahead and use that workbook and talk about this with your small group or with your marriage mentor.